This podcast is brought to you by StarCharge, the largest EV charging manufacturer in the world, and is also a provider of residential and commercial battery storage and microgrid solutions. And Kempower, the reliable, quick, and scalable EV charging solutions for everyone and everywhere. This episode is also made possible by the support we get from Fort Collins Kia. If you are in the market for any electric Kia, not only do they never add market adjustments, they will deliver your car to you anywhere in the 48 contiguous states for out-of-spec viewers. More information in the link in the show notes. Hello and welcome back to the Out of Spec podcast. I'm your host, Francie. Let's plug in for some EV news today. As we try to perfect EV charging, we have a lot of different companies and technologies looking at the best ways to tackle the many moving parts of pulling energy from the grid, managing power demand and supply, making the best solution for site hosts and the customers that are charging at these stations. Hosting EV charging isn't necessarily a cheap investment either. So site hosts have to consider a lot when choosing to add this critical infrastructure to their property. FreeWire is a name that you've probably heard on the Out of Spec channels, be it here on the podcast or over on the Out of Spec reviews channels. And the company's main offering is EV charging with energy storage, with the goal of simplifying the installation process while significantly reducing costs for site hosts. All right, sounds good so far. Today, we'll not only refresh you on what FreeWire has been up to, but also talk about their newest program called the FreeWire Accelerate program, where folks can host ultra-fast EV charging with zero upfront costs and why that is significant. Joining me today from FreeWire is Evan Conley, Head of Partnerships and Programs at FreeWire Technologies. Welcome, Evan, and thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Francie. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for your time today. So when I first heard this news that there would be zero upfront costs, my first thought was, this isn't exactly a new model. There are other EV charging hardware companies, CPOs, that provide something similar. But I would like to dive into that in a bit about why it's significant, why you've got to this point. But first off, just in case anyone isn't super familiar with FreeWire, can you tell us about the offering of FreeWire that you've had available to customers independent from this Accelerate program that we're going to dive into later?
Sure. So FreeWire is a DC fast charging company. So we focus exclusively on level 3 chargers. The interesting thing about our technology, though, is there's actually a battery integrated within the charger itself. This has many, many benefits, but what allows customers, whether they're a host or actually purchasing the technology themselves, is to access DC fast charging much faster. So you're going to avoid expensive upgrades to the building. You're going to avoid long lead times with the kind of utility or infrastructure to the building upgrades, and able to kind of put DC fast charging out in the market, out on your site quickly. It also has a lot of benefits as it relates to kind of avoiding demand charges and other utility expenses when it comes to DC fast charging. And we're seeing those kind of value propositions kind of rear their head more and more as more and more EV is adopted and charging is deployed.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that overview. I know that I've gotten to see your products, dummy chargers at conference shows and stuff. And I don't think I've seen one out in the wild yet, but I know Kyle has charged at one. And it does seem to really be a solution like, hey, you don't have to dig it all up. But the battery energy part of it is really significant, of course, to kind of alleviating a lot of the construction work that goes on for the EV charging. And I'd love to know more about and tell our audience a bit more about the design of the chargers. So I know you have the Boost Charger Pro and the Boost Power Pro. Can you tell me about that hardware?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the interesting things about the Boost Charger is that it is, on a relative basis to other level 3 DC fast chargers, it's bigger. And it's probably no surprise because integrated in it is the battery. So it's about 8 feet tall, about 4,000 pounds. Although it sounds big and take up a lot of space, it actually takes up a lot less space than if you were going to put a comparable DC fast charger plus additional switch gear and standalone battery storage. So it's a perfect application for smaller site hosts that can only support 1 or 2 locations in a tight constrained area, all the way up to large charging depots and fleet depots who simply just can't get the utility infrastructure at the right time or price for their location.
Okay, and then so that's the Boost Charger Pro. How is that distinct from the Boost Power Pro?
Yeah, so the two different Pro series that we have right now, the Charger Pro and the Power Pro, the difference is really, are you going to use the battery as more of a kind of bidirectional backup power source? So they both provide the same kind of fast DC fast charging for locations. But now that you have batteries on site, do you want to back up a critical load, or do you want to participate in energy kind of grid services programs? The Power Pro allows you to do that. The Charger Pro is really focused more on just the charging application and all the benefits that the integrated battery provides.
That's interesting. A way to back up kind of your microgrid there, so that if anything happens, you can pull it back from there. That's an interesting design that I'm sure. I mean, I can imagine certain site hosts that are already interested in FreeWire's technology because of like where they're set up or whatever. It might be nice to consider, okay, how can I have a bit more of a solid microgrid here on my site as well? So I think that's
exactly
pretty
right.
interesting. And what kind of speeds do your chargers offer coming, with the battery technology?
Yep. So both the Charger Pro and the Power Pro are 200 kW DC fast chargers. So these are really ultra fast chargers. The Pro series has a 150 kilowatt hour battery pack within it. So depending on the type of vehicle you're charging, you can kind of go from 20 to 80% in 20 minutes, 20, 30 minutes.
Okay, great. And then, of course, charging these batteries up, they probably pull from the grid a bit slower, right? So key to this design is, well, how quickly can, if I'm a site host, like how quickly can I fill these batteries back up so that I can serve, however many customers come through?
So this is actually one of the really cool things about the Pro series is that depending on the input service to the Boost itself, it can be a 208, a 240, or even 480 volt. We're able to kind of have the input power range anywhere from 53 kW down to 10 or 20. So that is much more to do with, number one, how fast you need to recharge the battery based on your charging requirements, but also two, what's the available power on site, and what are the cost benefits, kind of evaluating that. So we're able to kind of configure that to meet the customer, frankly, meet the building where it is and satisfy those requirements.
Because if you're thinking about demand chargers from charging an EV, which typical other hardware does when you're pulling directly from the grid, if you're pulling and filling up a battery, there's demand charges to consider there as well. No matter what, you're charging something up and pulling some sort of energy. So to be able to customize that, I'm sure is of pretty high priority with your customers. Would you say?
That's always the case, right? So no matter whether it's the vehicle or the battery, there's still demand charges that are going to be realized. Now, the benefit of having a battery buffered solution is that these are significantly less, because our charger, right, particularly when you're going down to like 20, 27 kW on the input side, effectively looks like a level 2 charger to the building, both in terms of energy and utility requirements, as well as ongoing expenses such as demand charges. So kind of avoiding those demand charges is really important for customers, and the battery lets you do that.
And then, of course, I have to think, okay, I have this, I'm imagining that I'm a site host here. And so I have one of your chargers on site, and say, some sort of issue comes up, as does with EV charging. And most important part is that I'm able to maintain it. I'm able to get help. What is the service and maintenance kind of agreement? And also, how does the design cater to be able to maintain and get the charger back up and running?
Great question. This one we get a lot when we're talking with customers. And actually, like, taking a step back, Francie, is part of like the Accelerate program. FreeWire is just, over the years that it's been in business, has looked at thousands and thousands and thousands of locations on behalf of customers. And what we're able to do now is have a very customer-centric model, as we're able to say, hey, look, we've reviewed 100 sites, and 65 of them look like they're wonderful candidates for public EV charging. Would you like to, if you want to purchase the unit, you can go ahead and kind of do that. We'll support you from an ongoing service perspective and maintenance perspective, like you asked. If you don't, for whatever reason, you don't have the budget, you don't have the time, or whatever other resource you want to dedicate this, FreeWire will own and operate the site. And so in that case, right, if we're talking about the Accelerate program, the customer doesn't have any capital outlay in order to kind of invest in the site up front, nor do they have any ongoing investment as it relates to kind of the maintenance and service of the units, which is pretty standard, right, for kind of like the third-party ownership model. What we do provide customers is they'll still say to you, hey, look, this is still something I need to worry about. I need to make sure that it's properly functioning, that my customers aren't having a bad experience. And so I think it's like a counterpoint to maybe some of the other programs that are out there, is that the FreeWire model is pretty customer-centric, even if the customer's a site host. I mentioned earlier that the units are pretty big. That actually provides opportunity. We encourage, and it's included in the program, for our customers to brand the unit. So even though FreeWire may own and operate the asset, it should look and feel as though it's an extension of the customer's brand and customer experience. That extends to the hardware on the screen as well. The software on the screen as well, where customers can integrate there. And so with that in mind, the question you asked is like, okay, from a servicing perspective, I want to make sure that even if I'm hosting the site, I don't own the asset, but my brand's on it. How can you make sure that it's an attractive, well-maintained, well-functioning location? And so we take that a step further, is in addition to kind of paying a monthly fee, we actually provide a 20% profit share. And so like we're in this together, right? It's their site, our technology, their brand, our shared profits. And so we all have direct incentive to market the site, to maintain it, and make sure that the customer experience is really good, whether it's just from a charging perspective or linking to their in-store experience.
Okay, so a bit of a shared revenue model and also shared responsibility model in a little bit of the ways where, I get to take on what I'm comfortable with, and still have this charger that is an amenity that I want to reflect my brand, whatever it is, my site, me, positively, so that people show up and get a great EV charging experience, and FreeWire can support you that way. So is there a specific ratio of that revenue sharing, or does it depend on the customer and their setup and everything?
So one thing that's interesting is that the program requires at least 2 boost chargers to be installed at the site. That's tied directly to our product. One of the benefits of this program is that we're able to provide third-party charging, or kind of like host agreements, to entities that only have space available for 2 chargers. And a lot of times, those space-constrained entities are also utility or grid constrained. And so by having the ability to go down to just 2 chargers and address smaller sites because of our battery, it's both the commercial offer and the technology together that are able to provide, I think, a wider net than a lot of other providers that are out there. So that's the minimum, right? It would be 2 chargers, and each charger has two ports. So it'd be 4 parking stalls would be the minimum. But that's not the maximum. We can scale up really depending on what the site can supply in terms of grid infrastructure, and what the local area will provide in terms of having EV drivers kind of attracted to that location.
Okay, that makes sense. So I was reading about this turnkey offering, right? And it's new for y'all. 0 upfront costs. You share in the charger revenue, and you have the option to owning the charging assets after year 5, right? So if it's going well and I want to buy it, I've kind of been leasing it a little bit, and then I can buy it outright. So that's an interesting model. And so I think it's also interesting, what the program includes. And I'd have the list here that I'd love to just read out for our audience. I took it directly from your webpage, so I'm sure it's accurate. But like you said, at least 2 DC fast charging stations with the 200 kilowatt output each, minimum payment and revenue share for site host, custom charger branding, like you said, maintain your look and feel, marketing support to attract drivers to your site, charger installation and commissioning, access to driver data and dynamic on-screen marketing, open to purchase stations, and open to integrate loyalty program or mobile app. So that's kind of like a whole program that you seem to be looping in with the site hosts for this 0 upfront cost Accelerate program. So is there anything else on that list that you think kind of we should throw out there?
Well, I think the 0 upfront plus the ability to purchase the system after the first 5 years, it's kind of gets back to customer centric model. Now, all the folks that watch and listen to this podcast are deep into the EV world, right? But a lot of the customers that we're talking to are just wading into the pool for the first time. And so as a technology company that just thinks that, look, there's a dearth of public reliable chargers out there, we say to customers, right, if you're not really making investment in the site, then we are. But over time, you've learned, right? You've seen the way that we promoted this. You've seen the way that what actually goes into operating these sites. And you think that's an important asset to take under your ownership. You can buy it outright at year 6. And for the next site that we have available to discuss, if you want to buy the charger directly from us and not have us own it, that's okay too. It's really meant to provide the fastest way for both FreeWire and, much more importantly, our customers to deploy DC fast charging. And so the features in some, right, really reflect that customer-centric model.
Makes sense. Keep that customer at the center, of course, and try to get as much reliable charging, like you said, out there as quickly as possible, which we know with the growing EVs on the road will continue to be a high pressure situation, right? And let's try to do it the best way. So what did it take for FreeWire to get to this point and offer this program? Why make this decision and why make it now?
Yeah, a couple different reasons, right? I think I mentioned a little earlier, as we traditionally been selling chargers outright, we just would see hundreds and hundreds of sites every month that had an incredible return on investment potential. But for whatever reason, a lot of them justifiable and understandable, the site host wasn't ready to do that, whether it was competing capital budgets or just kind of time or requirements or kind of, wondering what would change in the EV market overall. We just saw a lot of really good sites that are available. So that's number one. And number two, I think there's basically kind of a meeting the moment. I think the past 12 months or so have been a tremendous amount of change and shifts within the industry, and that I think we're really well poised right now for primarily, right, introducing our next generation products along with an easier route or alternative route for customers to deploy it. It's a really good time for FreeWire to kind of capitalize and I think trampoline on what's going on and help our customers along the way.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that perspective for sure. And it seems kind of like exciting launching a new program. Hopefully you can grab more of the market, create more opportunities for site hosts that haven't been able to take advantage of it for one way or another, or just create like a new case that people were waiting for, kind of like no upfront costs, but I can still benefit. I can dip my toes, in the pool of EV charging infrastructure. Let's go for it. So what does this say for the future of FreeWire? And also, what does it say for the future of the EV charging industry? Where do you see this how do you see this influence, not only within the company, but external to the larger industry?
I think what this says for FreeWire, right, is that kind of being able to kind of provide customers with more options is that we're going to be able to scale faster. And so, when you hear companies say they're going to scale faster, that can mean a lot of different things. But as it relates to what a customer, whether a site host or they bought the technology, that's going to provide a more dense network as it relates to technicians or install, right? And it's ultimately going to help with future product offerings as well as cost. I think what that means for the industry is that I really hope when, hopefully you and I catch up in a year or so, that some of the kind of like pain points and articles you read about in the papers around, not having enough DC fast charging or charging available that's reliable for folks who are adopting EVs, that dial is going to be turned down, that the noise is going to go down. And I think ultimately that customer experience, not the FreeWire customer experience, the EV driver experience as an industry, we have to do better on. And I think this is an important step. A lot of other companies are taking, I'd say, significant steps to address that right now. I think it's some of the negative headlines are actually, I think, real opportunities for companies to step into and address customer pain points.
I totally agree. We haven't really been here before in human history. Right. So there's tons of, mistakes to make, but lessons to be learned and opportunities and gaps to fill. And sometimes we can kind of predict them, and sometimes we learn as we go. But I think there's going to be more and more examples that we can take from all across the industry to create a reliable charging experience so that we can get all the EVs on the road that we want and, embrace a more electric transportation system. So it's really interesting to see what you're doing over at FreeWire. And I really appreciate your time and energy again, Evan, for coming onto the podcast. Is there anything else that you would want to share about that's coming up with FreeWire or that you would want folks to know listening in?
Yeah, Francie, again, thanks for inviting me and FreeWire to join. It's a really awesome talk. I think there's a whether or not a site host is going to go through the Accelerate program or the thing about buying charging for themselves. We have some really cool tools that help assess sites from a utilization perspective, tax credit or incentive programs, where your drivers are coming from, et cetera. So we're able to kind of provide that education to site hosts. We'd be happy to share that. I think that's whether or not they go through one program or the other, we don't care, right? We'll help provide the customer education.
Yeah, I think that is a good point. I saw that tool when I saw Arcady and spoke to him and did an interview with him at the North American Convenience Store show, which is a crazy show, mostly snacks, but also like 1/8 all the charging stuff. Yeah, which is interesting because, of course, there is this whole part of the industry that is very convoluted with how do I take advantage of the incentives that are here for me? And sometimes it's different for the battery energy storage solutions than the other kind of EV charging infrastructure. So to know that distinction and also have an expert, if not like a data-driven tool to guide me through the process as a site host, I think is definitely valuable as an understatement, really.
We certainly believe so.
Thank you so much, Evan. I really, again, appreciate you coming onto the podcast, being willing to let us know a bit more about FreeWire if people haven't heard about it, and of course about this Accelerate program. And I encourage all of our audience, if you have any questions that you're more curious about, I'm sure that we'll talk to FreeWire again in the future. We'll keep a close eye on them, but let us know in the comments what you think. And we'll catch you next time on the next episode. Thank you again, Evan.
Bye, Francie. Thanks so much.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. See you on the next episode.